Hi, I'm Dick Flax, co-chair of SBCAN, convener of the South County Roundtable for SBCAN every month. We have combined South and North County for today, in part because today's topic, which is to hear from the author, uh, a overview of the Santa Barbara Foundation report on housing affordability. To me, a landmark occurrence in the community that this report has come out. And I'll maybe say a little more about why it's a landmark in a second. But Cassandra Benjamin was the consultant who really conducted a very extensive, how long? A year, more than a year's worth of interviews with many people, including some of us maybe on this space, um, who contributed to the content of the report. And I think it's a landmark because it really endorses many of the values and goals of what I would call the progressive housing advocacy networks in our community and nationally. I think we're people who've advocated for not only more housing development, but at the same time, uh, what we call social housing, that is housing not built for profit, but because of need, housing that may require public subsidies of various kinds. That's a path to solutions that has gotten less than full attention in recent years, certainly on the federal level. Now, I think the pendulum is swinging in that direction. We recognizing the need for this, and this report is a kind of landmark, I think, in that, but also protecting tenants in this current housing world is an important goal of a lot of us around SBCAN and coalition with SBCAN, and the report deals with that as well. So Joyce Howerton has joined us. Joyce, welcome back to the region. Rather belatedly, you've been here for a while. Joyce was mayor of Lompoc in before most of us were born. No,
Oh, speak for yourself, Dick.
I was born.
Hi, everyone.
And welcome back to here and to working with us. Cassandra is the maybe I've already said this. She's the directs a consulting operation, CSB, with consultants based up in the Bay Area. They specialize in working with philanthropies and foundations, and especially quite expert and experienced on housing issues. Thank you for being with us, Cassandra. I asked Cassandra to not focus on the problem of housing, which all of us have been very familiar with, and the report extensively discusses that, but get to the point of paths to solution, policy directions for the community, and ideas for foundations and philanthropies to contribute. Give us and I think you have a good presentation that you're going to give to us. So welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. And I should say, I am a wonderful housing generalist, so I can be in conversation and listen to and learn from people who do the technical side of it, but I cannot, do a development pro forma. I can't set up a tenant renters board. I can't, there are people both on this call and in the community who not only, of course, know Santa Barbara County better than I, but also the ins and outs. What I have developed a lot of experience in is really translating housing issues to a broader audience, and particularly a philanthropic one, and helping philanthropy understand that that there are solutions and they can be part of them. And so I really appreciate Dick in the beginning for Richard for saying, yeah, you can skip all the problem part. I don't find that so helpful. I think we all know there's a housing affordability crisis. I think where we really need to change some hearts and minds in order to change policies and funding streams is with a sense of potential and cross-sector collaboration and hope. So that is my goal. I'm going to do a brief PowerPoint and happy to take questions during and after. Once I start sharing my screen, I can't always see everybody. So feel free to use that raise your hand function or use the chat or something
Well,
else.
what our custom is to use the chat room
Yeah,
while
perfect.
people are talking, and then we'll read off from there and maybe open the floor after you've done the presentation. So use the chat at any point, and later we'll have the
So
dialogue.
hopefully you are now seeing not my whole computer screen because it's sort of messy, but the PowerPoint. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so this was a report commissioned by the Santa Barbara Foundation in a strategic plan from a few years back. Actually, they identified, sorry, what? Now I am on the housing report that I did. Let me just toggle. Okay. So when they commissioned this was related to their strategic plan, and they really wanted to see ways that they could make a difference. That was really their goal, is what would be philanthropy's role. But in order to do that, they felt like they really needed to hear from the whole community. And frankly, I was really impressed with the Community Foundation use this as an opportunity to actually start to hopefully build some community consensus around solutions. So we spent a lot more time than I have in other locales, not only with the usual things about reading all the existing reports and data and forming an advisory committee, but this advisory committee really had people who were strong tenants' rights advocates and big pro-development people. It had people who were from Santa Maria and Lompoc and people from Goleta and Santa Barbara. It had folks who were in adjacent areas around education, health, other kinds of employers that housing impacts. So really diverse group on both the committee. And then we held in-person listening sessions in 3 parts of the county. They had great turnouts. We also did some very specific focus groups where I vetted some of the recommendations that were coming up in the process with people. For example, I had one group with just the city and county planning and development staff, because I wanted to make sure that recommendations that were coming up were ones that were feasible. They didn't have to agree with them all, but everything that went in the report had to pass sort of a sniff test for being semi-feasible and having enough will behind it. And then we did individual interviews. So in terms of findings, won't be surprising, but you had general agreement on the problems. So that this shortage was negatively impacting everybody from individual human beings all the way up to large, the Vandenberg Space Force stuff. And all these problems were within it, that things took too long, they cost too much. And one of the things that groups like yours called out the most was who is bearing the brunt of this housing affordability crisis. And as causes report showed, it's people of color and immigrants, it's our lowest income households. There was also even more agreement on the solutions. It was great to hear, but not something I expected, that everybody agreed that increasing public and political will was the number one priority. And that is in part, we'll go into that recommendation, but that is sort of the foundation for any kind of new funding streams, citing of a project, anything, you need public and political will. Most people cited a need for more predictable and efficient planning and approval processes, and most cited a need for more funding. Many people suggested that there were some innovations that either were happening on just a small scale in Santa Barbara, or maybe not even happening there yet and happening in other communities that could make a difference. And when I say Santa Barbara, I'm referring to your whole county and all the cities in it for the purposes of today. Just so I clarify that. And then most people noted the need to really work across the sectors, from government to private developers, to nonprofit developers, to advocacy groups, to really find areas of agreement and make a difference. So We did use, and I'm pretty sure your group's familiar with it, we use the 3Ps framework, this idea that you have to do protection, preservation, and production in concert. If you only do production, we lead to gentrification and displacement. If you only did protection, we've got no new units for anybody to be in. So there has to be a mix. And of course, preservation is so important to take advantage of our current housing stock and ensure it remains habitable and also affordable. So it's this blend of pieces that's super important in any work that you do around housing. The advisory committee used these as the ranking criteria. They said, we're going to only prioritize recommendations that are financially sustainable, that get at some of the funding issues. That's a key part. That really help people, that meet an actual community needs and have significant positive results, and that they think would really have impact. This was an important one to people in the group, that we could put all our dollars or political capital into like one project, and we might help 200 families, and that's great, but there's thousands and thousands of more in need. So thinking about that scale and replicability. We then came up with buckets of recommendations, and these are in the order ranked within the group. So as I mentioned, this public and political will was the top one. And one of the things that stood out to me from doing this work in other places is the lack of a county-wide nonprofit advocacy group focused on housing affordability. And I want to be careful when I say this. I mean, there's REACH that's across your region doing kind of some of the housing research. There's the South Coast Chambers, and I'm forgetting the name of the Coastal Housing Advocacy Group that represents some employers in the South Coast. There's the work CAN has done across the region. There's the work SBCAN does. There are a lot of groups doing some part of this, but generally they are bound by a smaller geography than your county, a particular focus, maybe more on protection or more on production, a particular kind of housing. So what was missing is this container where everyone's coming together. And one of the things that's really important in building these, as I've seen them work in other communities, is the strongest ones actually have people who disagree on them. So the strongest ones are filled with people and organizations who can agree on a suite of things and work in partnership without being 100% aligned. And I say that because the people who most advocate around production and the ones who most advocate around protection, there are differences. The chambers, and you know this well, sort of the chambers and the business ones are going to not come out in support of, say, rent control. And the tenants' rights advocates are usually not going to give up on that. And so part of making these coalitions work is saying, okay, our coalition together will do these 8 things, and these 2 over here, we're going to disagree or work in different groups for, and that's okay. So I'm going to stress that one. Another important thing that came up was this need for pro-housing public messaging. So in some communities, they call this having housing-ready communities or pro-housing messages. But it's an idea where we know that most of the population in your county is concerned about housing of one type or another. And people who actually show up to do something about it, that's a much smaller portion. And so we have to reach that whole middle group who could care or be activated to understand that housing matters and there's something they can do about it. Including actually showing up in support of specific policies and sites. Gary, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I'm sorry, I was coughing.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So there is a need for not just people who are against things, as you're aware, to show up, but like the coalitions and the ways you all have gotten people to show up regularly for meetings. We also need more support for polling, for organizing, and all the things that go behind actually making a policy change or getting a bond measure passed. And then finally, it's important to remember that elected officials and government staff, they often need help to support these policy changes and then to implement them and to innovate. So most of our public systems are underfunded. They are often rewarded for compliance more than innovation. And they don't have time in their day jobs to keep up on every latest trend and thing over here. And so the more in other communities, what's happened is sometimes private funders and others have actually supplied money for technical assistance to help cities and counties. And one example I'll give is in Sonoma County, the Generation Housing, the local housing advocacy coalition, is working with all the jurisdictions together to get the statewide pro-housing designation that helps you draw in more state funding and also makes each of those jurisdictions who get pro-housing designation get it because they've streamlined some of their processes. And they're helping them with all the work behind to do that. And it's more cost effective to help 7 jurisdictions at once, or maybe, I'm sorry, 13, and Sonoma County is 13, than to do one by one. That would be an example. Financing, another big bucket. We're not going to get out of this mess without putting more money toward housing. If we look back into like up really until the Reagan years, at the federal government level, we invested hugely in affordable housing, particularly housing that was affordable for very low income populations. We stopped that, and lo and behold, homelessness arose at a wide scale in our country. Direct correlation. So we need more funding to make this work, especially in high cost areas like California. One of the areas that many counties in California have been successful at is passing a countywide affordable housing bond. In the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, Santa Clara County got a $950 million bond passed. Others have gotten 750, 500 million. And now the Bay Area is actually banding together to try to do a regional one across the Bay Area counties that's going to be in the billions. So that's some serious dollars to put toward housing. Bunch of great strategies behind that. Right now, you have a higher voter threshold needed, but there's a measure on your 2024 statewide ballot that would decrease it to only needing a majority. If that passes, these become much more doable too. There is already a proposal in the works in the city of Santa Barbara for the transit occupancy tax, and the stakeholders involved thought that was really worth going for. This is not meant to suggest that nowhere else in your county could try one. But in the group that we worked with, they felt like it was most viable in the city of Santa Barbara at this time. One of the ways philanthropy can get in the game is that some foundations are sitting on a lot of assets, but only paying out 5% a year in grants as is required. And they could be making some low interest loans with the other dollars they're sitting on. And there's lots of great examples of those. People had some really creative ideas around deferring, reducing, or waiving fees for affordable units. So this could be even if a market rate developer, say, was building 100 units and they agreed to make 30 of them affordable, maybe they could get some fee reduction or some expedited zoning or other things for doing that. There's a lot of creative ideas within there, and some of your jurisdictions have already experimented with some ideas there. And then another way is to just increase your competitiveness for state funding opportunities. Land use and zoning. So sometimes when people redevelop an area, they do what's called an area-wide plan. What is so great about that is instead of picking off one street or block by block or even building by parcel, I'll use an example from when I was doing work down in Austin. They had an old airport area that was, they redeveloped it in a whole area-wide plan. And so ahead of time, they zoned for X number of housing units total and Y that would have to be affordable. And so that was already in there. So all the developers had real certainty about the process and the infrastructure and clarity. And that really improved capacity. And you have some industrial type areas, for example, that you could do that as well as others. Having more objective design standards, which the county, I believe, has been looking into, as well as pre-approved plans. So in work I've done around accessory dwelling units, there's been some success with these pre-approved plans where the cities have like 6 models that are already, you know, if you build something basically like that, you pay less fees and go faster. That's the idea. Folks had a lot of ideas about ways to increase density through upzoning, bonuses, infill, expanding height limits, reducing setbacks, all sorts of things. People had other ideas for creating more predictable and efficient planning and approval processes. And finally, for getting some more funding to help city and county staff do all this work and implement these changes. Housing innovations. So one thing that really stood out in your community is that you had more partnerships that I've often seen between for-profit developers and in either one of your 2 housing authorities or nonprofit like People's Self-Help. But a lot more projects that were going forward with this mix, which is a great way, right? We don't really want to isolate or segregate our lower income units. We actually really want to integrate them into higher opportunity neighborhoods where they have access to the better schools and to grocery stores and parks and all the amenities that tend to be in higher opportunity areas. And so if we can do these mixed developments between for-profit and nonprofit, it's a really great outcome for people, as well as making them more affordable to build overall. Folks had ideas for trying to do more commercial infill and reuse. They looked at some ideas for some downtowns that could just get a second layer that also helps the small businesses that have been struggling or improve with the foot traffic. People brought up this employer-based housing idea. I'd say I included it because it's what the will of the people said that we spoke with, and that makes it important. There are real challengers with employer-based housing. I think that if we're really thinking about housing affordability, we could lean into, for example, some of the school districts doing housing for school staff are really good, especially the ones that allow for school staff, including like your janitors, your administrative assistants, your parent aides, the lowest paid jobs in the schools. I think a challenge with employer-based housing is just that your employer is your landlord, and what happens when you're not working for them anymore in terms of your housing. So just sort of a thing to keep in mind. You do have some examples now of employer-based housing assistance. Vandenberg, for example, gives a $2,000 a month stipend for some of their workforce to find housing in the community. Another innovation was around modular and offsite construction. There are areas more in cities like San Francisco and LA, but some other places that have really taken advantage of these construction techniques that save time and money. And you could be looking into more of those. And then one of the opportunities I'm most excited about that came up was this idea of, since our land costs are so high, developing housing on land that's already owned by a mission-based actor. So you've already got a friendly landowner who will hopefully sell or lease or for very cheap or maintain ownership. And there are now, the state just approved to go into effect in January, a bunch of policies that make it faster and easier to develop land on any of these kinds of things. So school districts, community colleges, churches, temples, mosques, county, surplus county and city property, utility district properties. There's a whole range of them. But that I think is a really good opportunity for you all. And then my last slide, then we can open it up and I can see faces again. Housing protection opportunities. And I know this is an area you all have done a lot of work in. But certainly we need to support the community organizing and policy advocacy necessary to not just enact, but also enforce tenant protections. One of the challenges in this tenant protection area has often been we pass things, but if the city doesn't have funding for code enforcement or habitability inspections, then having having measures like that doesn't ensure that people are going to be living in good and safe conditions, for example. If you're not funding the legal aid services, how do you know that the eviction protection is going to hold up? So important for not just the enactment of these, but the enforcement. Providing direct financial assistance is another housing protection opportunity, really thinking about, are there instances where short-term rental assistance subsidies would help a household maintain their housing? It's a lot more expensive once they lose housing. Your Habitat has some programs around providing free repairs to help homeowners stay in their building, and then modifications for people aging in place or older homeowners. There can be low-cost loans also to help these populations. Supporting legal services, as I mentioned, to ensure the fair housing and address some of this. Increasing density within single-family zoning is another protection strategy. If I know that accessory dwelling units can be used as somebody's their guest room, their workout room, or short-term rental in some cases. So it's not saying that every new unit on a place is good, but you can incentivize and set up programs to encourage accessory dwelling units specifically to be longer-term rental units. One innovative project in the center part of the state was when Habitat for Humanity built new houses with their members. Every garage had an over garage rental unit on it. And this allowed the family more income. And also for multi-generational families, it allowed them to have other household members who were then renting. So there's some interesting strategies to increase density in single family zoning. That's just one example. And then finally, other parts of California have gotten very active in the community land trust movement and other ways to really have sort of co-ownership of land and housing, sharing the equity, where basically a nonprofit of some sort, a mission-based actor, is controlling the land, so it's always going to stay affordable. And then if people own a home on it, they only get some of the equity once they sell, because we've got to keep it at an affordable level. So it creates affordable housing, a little bit of wealth generation for families, but not as much as you could have, and ensures ongoing affordability. And it's a strategy that's also been used around mobile home parks to allow tenants of mobile home parks to actually buy the parks they're in and own and manage the units. So I'm going to stop there. I can go back to any particular slides if that's helpful, or I can just, I'm going to pause. And I will be happy to open up any slides that were helpful. I know that was a lot. And I'd be really curious which of these recommendations, if there's any that you think aren't so workable or just don't understand or questions about, or areas that you really resonate that you want to emphasize that you think people should be working on.
So before I open to everyone, I often take the lead as a professorial type. And the one question that I really wanted to get some insight into is, now that you've made this report for the Santa Barbara Foundation, which is our, of course, leading community foundation in the county, what do you think their process is going to be in terms of how they themselves will actually implement this? What do you understand about that? Would be good for us to get insight into that, and maybe one of the striking things about the report was that it advocated foundation support for organizing of tenants and for organizing grassroots activism, which of course is what a lot of us are engaged in, as well as on a very different scale, leveraging or support for affordable housing directly. So why don't you give us a sense of what you think that their process is going to be, and how do we liaison with them if that's possible?
Sure. So what the Santa Barbara Foundation has publicly committed to is trying to, between their own funds, both their own grant making funds, and frankly, they have they have somewhat of a modest grant making budget of their own. A lot of it's donor advised funds, but from their own grant making funds, as well as trying to influence their donor advisors and other foundations. And then also from their own endowment for the low interest loan side and other foundations endowments to raising $10 million total. They have not committed what percentage will be grants versus loans. I'm going to guess the grants are going to be the lower dollar amount from the loans, just realistically. And so they are right now just starting that fundraising. So I'm speaking next week at another donor. Next week will be my third time speaking to donors or private funders about this on their behalf. So part of it is that they need to develop, frankly, the resources to have impact in this area. So that's their number one job. They just got brought on a new vice president of programs because Rubai left. And so Liz is their new vice president of programs. She comes to them from the Hilton Foundation, and she will spearhead this work. And in some time frame, which I would guess to be the next 3 to 5 months, she'll hire a program officer to work in this area that then would be your contact. Until that time, Liz is the best contact you have, but being honest, she's 3 weeks on the job. She doesn't have staff for this position, and her other lead staff persons, her North County staff person that many of you from North County might know, Petra, is still out on maternity leave. So I would not expect, because they don't have all the dollars in hand yet, and they don't have the staff, I wouldn't expect immediate action, just frankly. In terms of which of the philanthropic recommendations they'll take up, and I focused my presentation today on the overall cross-sector ones, that some of which are really for government to take the lead on, or privates to take the lead on, or whatever. For philanthropy, I have certainly stressed that in the area of housing, the most cost-effective grants you can make are around policy, organizing, advocacy, community education, the whole span of activities that goes into that. So you could spend $500,000 on that, and that could pass some new laws and raise a new housing bond that could get tens of millions or hundreds of millions. You could alternatively spend that $500,000 in one housing development to build like one unit. So in housing, this idea of leverage is super important. So I can say my best advice, and the advice that they allowed me to publish in the report, was all about that. What grants they will ultimately make is, of course, up to their discretion. I think that they will be looking to see a way that they can spread, that they can do some things around protection, production, and preservation, that they're hitting a little bit of each. One of the nice things about all the public will building work is that really creating a more, right now, I would say that we have sort of a disabling environment for housing in our communities. Creating a more enabling environment for housing and housing affordability benefits every one of the strategies. Mm-hmm. So I think they are going to lean into that public will building. And I know that they had some interest from some donors on that pro-housing messaging also. So I think they're going to look at how can they be part of seeding the start of this coalition, this countywide group, to take on some of this work. So those are certainly the things they've asked my advice on going forward about doing. So they've expressed interest, but I've now shared like the absolute limits of my, knowledge. I am not, I'm not in any position to make a commitment from them, but that's my understanding of where they are now.
So just following up on a key point that I thought was new for me in this report was your foregrounding of the need for a countywide coalition or political, advocacy structure. And we do have SBCAN is countywide. This Fund for Santa Barbara funds and has relationships north and south throughout the county. Cause is a countywide organization. Those are three, and of course I would imagine the League for Women Voters, and some of the other groups that have been around the table with us on housing have countywide operations. So there is a very loose but definite county-wideness about the reach of a lot of our organizations. The housing issues have been much more active on the South Coast uh, than countywide. And you're pushing in the report for a countywide bond issue, something that people have talked about without anything being done. This, how do we? So let me just ask you: was there in your in your interviewing with people, was any indication of any people that were looking at this countywide kind of political coalition and or a bond issue? Did you get a sense there was already some people around who want to do those things?
Sure, I'll answer that, and then maybe I'll take a couple of questions in the chat next.
Yes.
So for this, I would say that what I heard was that in both Ventura and San Luis Obispo counties, they are already exploring more actively than in New York County this affordable housing bond issue. And the leaders in that are from Cause and People Self-Help Housing. And then it varies depending on the county. So in SLO, REACH, the Economic Development Research Group, has been very active, and they've been pursuing one tactic, but are looking at doing more. And in Ventura, there is a Housing for All group that's the city of Ventura that's been active. So there, those discussions have been happening. I think it takes a while to build up to these. And so I would say that your 2026 ballot is your most likely timing. And you'd have to decide, is that, the best one to go for? But you need some time to build. And then in terms of the countywide coalition, I want to stress what it is about having, and it can be a coalition, or it could be a fiscal agent from something else in a project or its own nonprofit, but it's a group of folks who have staffing and who have a mission, and they have paid staff, and they are all in on this one issue around housing affordability. And they're working at it on a variety of levels: the messaging, the technical assistance, the campaigning and advocacy. And so it's the board of directors of a group like that would often look like representatives from all the organizations you mentioned, but it still needs some of that dedicated staffing and funding to make it work. Generally, it's really, we already stretch all these groups so thin. And the ones I'm aware of, have start off with about 3 staff, and they wind up at a 5 to 10 staff level. So just as a sort of perspective piece, it may be that in your region, having a Central Coast group would be viable, or it may be that even if you have a Santa Barbara County group, that then you go for a bond across all 3 counties. That might go better and get more dollars. Those are all things you'll have to work out. But I would say Cause, REACH, People Self-Help were the groups who I heard talking about it the most through my interviews. All right. Now,
so Gary, Michaels, you had a couple of questions in chat. So why don't you just say them?
oh, sure.
Gary, are you there?
Well, we'll start with your first one. Gary asked about CEQA.
Yeah.
And so I think that many people, I can't speak to any specific developments in Santa Barbara County where CEQA was weaponized, but I would say that CEQA had a positive intent when founded around environmental protections, and it has gone way too far, in my opinion, to the other side. And a lot of places, this is where the state has actually been incredibly active in providing tools for local communities to try to work on this. And so for recommended changes, I would say it would be working with your state senator, Limon, and your assembly person, and then the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and really looking at what are other measures. It may be that the state has now made some changes. I didn't find that your cities and counties were always the most up to date in every one of the housing friendly policies and options to deal with things like this. I saw room for growth, and I'm not the technical person to go through and do an audit out of all of those. but I think that that's somewhere that could be addressed. And I love the rent. So in general, sharing the Santa Maria article that's in the chat. So all stakeholders were clear that it was a lot easier to build housing and affordable housing in the north part of the county, much more pro-housing environment, and that it was more challenging in the south, and that we had to watch for a balance there because you already have clogged freeways. And the idea that everybody who works in a service industry, that none of those people, mostly people of color, aren't allowed to live in the south part and have to commute from Ventura to Santa Maria is discriminatory, is more segregation, so that we want to capitalize on the good housing work of the North County, but we don't want to lose the south. And before I go to the chat, Linda, yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Linda. You're muted. Yep.
I got it. Well, I just wanted to start by saying how happy I am to see this report. I did go to the first of the big meetings, and I wasn't terribly hopeful at that point, but I think you've done a really good job of talking to a lot of people. And compared to some of the other jurisdictions, I think you've really captured the people that have the most housing insecurity. You really have, captured what the renters need. And that's been one of my concerns. On your website, I love you talk about you solve complex problems in order to create equitable communities. And those are two important words. Our situation is so complex. A lot of us just kind of give up and say, it's too hard to tackle. But you've given us some direction on what we should be starting with. I think one question I have is, you dealt with this a little bit, but to what extent do you still have a contract to be working on this? Like, how much longer can we expect to see your face?
Well, that's really up to the Santa Barbara Foundation. So I had a contract to write the report, and now they've asked me to stay to do presentations like this and to work with them to present for their donors and to help them think about initial implementation steps. So I think that probably until they are staffed up, I'll be like an advisor over here. As a consultant, it's super important to not do the work that should be somebody else's. So I am not local. I am also not in it for the long haul. That is, I'm not going to be showing up at every one of these meetings, and I'm not, anyway, so I have to sort of know my role. So I would say I probably have some number more months of advising, and I'll always be happy to answer questions or share resources. But I think the important part is for this foundation to own its part of the piece of the work, which means resourcing it internally, not just externally.
Well, I think just to follow that up, that it's really important for the foundation, having taken this step, which I think is kind of bold. Just having the report is kind of bold, but now they need to follow that up with staff and commitment to certain objectives. So the quicker they can establish the mechanisms for that, the better for everybody, right?
Absolutely. And they definitely feel that boldness. They're a little nervous. They know they jumped off the high dive by going public. And they really got to do some fundraising. They looked at what California Community Foundation, for example, in LA does, and they have 4 staff, and they have tens of millions in program related investments. They have grant, so they're really at a different scale, and they're going to have to get everyone's help to do that. There's a question here about an audit of affordable housing construction costs. So I did not see an audit for Santa Barbara, but I can share after this meeting. I can send the link to Dick to send out. There have been studies to show all the costs that go into an affordable unit and how ridiculous, how expensive it is. So my memory is that in your county right now, if we're talking about a multifamily development, we're estimating about $500,000 a unit. I know in San Francisco, it's up to $900,000 a unit. I mean, it's just really nuts. I can say that the things that drive costs, as any developer would tell you, is the slow timing of things really makes a difference. So affordable projects, from the twinkle in the eye to a place to move in, are on like 3 to 7 year tracks. That's a lot of time to carry all these costs before you've got any rent coming in, rent that's not even enough to pay for it because it's affordable, but still something. So that long time window, so if we can get those approvals faster, it matters. Another thing that makes affordable units so expensive is that a for-profit developer is basically, they have some sort of equity in their business or from their investors, and then they get some sort of commercial loans. A nonprofit developer is putting on average 11 different funding streams together to fund that. That's just for the capital part of the project. We haven't even talked about the operating costs or if they need services, supporting services. So that many things requires technical expertise. It means a lot of waiting around and filling out applications, and the county's application with the city, with the state, with the feds don't always sync up. In your case, you're pretty small population wise. And so when you're going after your federal tax, your low-income housing tax credits at the state level, they're only going to fund so many projects on a central coast around. So you might wait 3 years for your turn to come up, not because your project isn't good or worthy, just because there's a backlog. So those are a couple things that do make affordable units. That long planning timing, the multiple and complex funding streams cost more. And then finally, you have a problem that somebody's going to pay, say, $2,000 a month in rent, but the funding on it, it's costing you $4,000 a month to operate that unit. Where's that subsidy going to come from? And we need a lot more help there, especially from the federal government around vouchers. There are vouchers in the works at the state level, potentially for folks who have mental health disabilities. We already have them for veterans from the feds. We have other ways to try to draw down on some of those operating costs, but that's been an issue.
Thank you.
Oh, welcome.
I think I always like to point out that our housing authority, city of Santa Barbara and county, are really rather wonderfully creative and brilliant about all of those things that you're talking about.
They're great.
But they are, really pushing for the kind of steady revenue stream that the affordable housing fund in the city would provide, at least for the city housing authority, is really critical at this point. By the way, I wanted to acknowledge that Spencer Brand has joined us. He's aide to Das Williams at the county board, and Roger Himovitz, you're here. I wonder whether you have a particular interest in what's happening. And you joined us late, so I don't know if you're familiar with the report that the foundation has issued, and Cassandra Benjamin is the person who really was the author of that report. So
Comment in the chat too. Sorry, I have one more that you can't see, but I can see, that I wanted to just
go ahead.
Address. Sorry. So Virginia, you raised some specifics. I'm not sure about every specific that you're bringing up in the chat to me, but I think you have a really important question at the end of it, which is, why should philanthropists pay for housing when investors should bear more of the cost? That is a super important question, and it's part of, we didn't talk today, the recommendations I presented today were the work that we all have to do together, a mix of government, for-profit, nonprofit, philanthropy, everybody. The latter half of the report deals with what philanthropy can do and just their lane. And one of the things I emphasize is staying in their lane and not doing somebody else's job. Because they don't have the resources to, and they won't be as good at it. So philanthropists should not bear the costs that a private developer or for-profit should do. And so, for example, when they look at maybe making a low interest bridge loan to a project, they're going to have to demonstrate that it has a charitable impact to make it. So let's say they're going to loan $500,000 to a housing project. That's going to need to go to benefit units that are for people at a certain median income and below. It can't be just to you know, oh, great, it's an infill and development opportunity that offers more housing. Philanthropy's job can't be to provide something that would really be market rate in that way. So that is important. Now, where philanthropy does make a difference in the big picture, again, is that enabling environment. If philanthropy helps fund advocacy and policy change that streamlines approval processes, period, that's going to create more market rate and more affordable units, both through the taxation and deductibility.
What?
Virginia, I need you to come off chat and explain your question to me because I'm missing it.
My question is that I know that Monique Limon has a tax bill that's gone to a 2-year bill, which would tax Airbnb and VRBOs, and also the deductibility of rental investment properties could be looked at in terms of adding existing structures to the inventory. And I wonder if that has been analyzed in any way.
Great, got it. So those didn't come up as, I would say, what came up in all my listening sessions and with local stakeholders was the only really specific thing that came up was like that transit, the TOT tax, transit occupancy tax. But in other jurisdictions, one of the ones I'm intrigued by are these vacancy occupancy taxes that are for people who have like the 3rd, 4th, or 5th home. That's just, they don't need to even rent it out and it's sitting there. I personally would like those taxed. And that's a strategy people have used. People have used having higher taxes on the short-term rentals. You already tax your hotels, and I assume your VRBOs and Airbnbs are also paying something. But if you feel that it's causing a loss of longer-term rentals, you could try to figure out ways to tax those to go into an affordable housing fund. You can also do what Ojai did and said, we're just not having those. You know, and that I think that they are, I know this only anecdotally, but they seem less hollowed out than the community I know live in north of the Golden Gate Bridge that has a lot of vacation rentals that allowed way too many. And I just have empty houses near me.
Okay.
And
Thank you. Thank you.
So we promised to have a bit on the Santa Maria a planning process. So thank you so much, Cassandra, for this, for the work you've done and for the presentation. I'm personally inspired by all of these ideas and the way in which you've kind of brought together a lot of the thinking that we've all been engaged in and made this sort of a codified statement. And the report is easily obtained online. And I think the announcement of this meeting provided that link. And maybe the PowerPoint you presented is really from the report, right? We don't need a separate.
it's pretty duplicative, but I'll just text. I'm going to send back the PowerPoint. I'll ask Liz if I can share her email address.
Okay.
And if not, I mean, if you know anyone at Santa Barbara Foundations and you look up Liz and her, you know, it's probably it should be on their website, in fact. But
Yes.
I'm going to see if I can find that audit of affordable housing costs that Gary asked about. And then I just want to leave with a word of encouragement that these recommendations, these are all from all of you. Like, these are ones, nothing came in this report that there wasn't a majority of people interested in making happen locally. These weren't like some crazy ideas I grabbed from somewhere else. So I'm really excited that there's a lot of potential solutions and momentum for you all to work on. And I'm excited to see what you do with it. So thanks for allowing me to join today.
Thank you, and we'll hopefully see you again. Thanks, Cassandra.
Okay, bye-bye.
So I'm going to turn over to Jeannie, who is in Santa Maria, to introduce this particular agenda item. There are a lot of people here from Santa Maria, and Alan's here to give us the poop. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Thanks, Dick. SBCAN has been working with Community Environmental Council, which is Alan. Alan is actually both because he's a board member of SBCAN. but Ken Huff and Nancy Avos have been working on this issue. Ken was prepared to present on it as well, but he had something come up and couldn't make today's meeting. So Alhan will be presenting on the work on the Santa Maria General Plan, what's coming up with the cities addressing this this coming Tuesday. So Alhan, I'd just like to turn it over to you and let you do the presentation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jeannie. Yeah, I mean, I can introduce myself a little bit. I am a board member. I think it's my first year with SBCAN as board member. I am also the Senior Climate Projects Associate for the Community Environmental Council. I've been with them since 2020, and I'm also based out of Guadalupe. I'm a Santa Maria native, and so I focus on North County projects. And so the general plan is part of one of our goals to build some of that momentum that we've been hearing about. So we've been meeting monthly, specifically to talk about the Santa Maria general plan. For folks who don't know, the general plan is a long-term vision for the city, and it covers many different elements like noise, housing, and land use, and recently environmental justice as a required element. And so with that, we've been meeting monthly. So CEC, SBCAN, CAUSE, and several other organizations have been meeting to talk about the general plan, help break it down, and try to kind of coalesce and try to find a strategy to advocate for an improved plan, and also improved community involvement, which is really important, especially in Santa Maria. So that is hopefully the introduction just for our meetings and what the general plan is. But specifically, what's been happening right now is the city council is voting to approve their preferred land use alternative. So most recently, they worked on a housing element, but for the past several months, they've been working on developing a preferred land use plan. This basically is really important to the city because it tells you what you can build in the future, and basically what you're giving space for different zoning types. It also covers density as well as annexation. So for this process, the city of Santa Maria had to release 3 alternatives. These are alternatives A, B, and C. So every city has to do this general plan update, and every city is required to do these 3 alternatives. One that is focused on only annexation. So basically, based on certain criteria that the city needs to meet, like housing, they try to meet it only by annexing. There's alternative B that is done only through infill or only through developing within the city. And then there's a third called the hybrid approach, and that is in essence a combination of the two. From those 3 alternatives, basically one is or a variety, different portions of each plan are picked for a preferred plan. For the city of Santa Maria, the Planning Commission recently moved to recommend a modified hybrid plan. So this modified hybrid plan basically includes some annexation, but the modifications added additional annexation than what was originally kind of shared and looked at and shared with the community members. This annexation is really what SBCAN has been most publicly talking about in terms of a position. And so most recently, SBCAN and CEC published an op-ed. So let me share my screen. I'm going to take a breath. But Ken recently published with Nancy, I think is the ghostwriter here, but basically in Newshawk, the Santa Maria Times as well. Are we seeing my calendar, or are we seeing the news article here? Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen.
We're
Okay.
not seeing the news article.
Okay, here we go.
There it is. Okay.
So this was recently published this week, and so you can find this news article in Newshawk, Santa Maria Times. There was also a separate just article that was written in the Santa Maria Sun. And basically this covers some of the information that I talked about, as well as the need to advocate to protect agricultural lands. And so that is one aspect that we have been trying to coalesce around. Recently, we also wrote a sign-on letter. This sign-on letter had around 16 orgs and individuals. And this was basically to advocate not for the hybrid plan or the hybrid alternative, but we actually wanted to advocate for the infill alternative. So basically a different plan than the city is really kind of going towards. Here's a sign-on letter. I don't know, Nancy, if you could help me out by maybe sharing it in the chat. It's pretty long, and so I won't really read it today, but it covers 5 main topics. And these topics are the ones that the city really highlighted for them as their metrics. So the city has their own metrics, and so they want to also pick the plan that meets the community's needs the best. So for the city, it was based on housing, transportation, greenhouse gas reduction, economic revenue, and then the impact on agricultural lands. So these are the 5 reasons and the 5 metrics that the city is using. And so these were the 5 reasons that the sign-on letter highlights the analysis that the city did. And so right here, I'll just kind of keep it brief, but why we're advocating for developing within the city's boundaries and not annexing and not developing on, newly undeveloped land is actually because the infill option would provide the most housing compared to each alternative. When it comes to vehicle miles traveled and transportation, folks were really advocating for a more walkable city. And the infill alternative actually does show a decrease. In other words, you'll have to do less driving to get to where the service is or where you need to get for work. Very importantly, the infill alternative was the only alternative that actually had a reduction in greenhouse gases. I can show, hopefully, let me see if I zoom in here. You can see right in the middle that a survey advocated and community members really advocated almost half, 41% voted for the infill option, whereas 40% were hoping for a balanced or a hybrid approach. When we are looking at housing, all 3 meet the housing needs. That's a baseline. They all have to meet that need. But if you actually look at the units, focusing on developing inside the city would provide the most excess amount of units, which is really important. And affordability is also something that is really important. And so that's why we're also advocating for an inclusionary ordinance to ensure that affordable housing is included. And so that also includes moderate, low income, very low, acutely low. And so there's a lot of categories that we need to make sure are truly affordable for the city of Santa Maria. Here you can really see the emissions that this green bar is where we're currently at. And this basically 25 year long plan really tells us which of the three will actually reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. If the city were to pick the hybrid plan, this does not mean that we will have to give up on greenhouse gas emissions, but what it will mean is that the city will have to adopt really strong policies to make up the difference. And so this is one of the kind of key points that we're trying to highlight when we're advocating for this infill option. One, it's really clear that the infill is meeting the community's needs in terms of safety, walkability, and really focusing on infrastructure within the city limits. But if the city chooses to instead annex, we really want to highlight the path that they're going to, put us on, and the fact that it's really going to limit or dictate the types of policies that we'll need to advocate for. And so greenhouse gas emissions is a really clear highlight, just the differences between annexing land and meeting the state requirements. Also, something that's really important to note, and these slides are from the analysis that the city consultants did. So these are the city's slides. But something that's really important to note is that it says here, alternative A and C have higher emissions per capita due to increased vehicle travel, building energy use, water usage in the newly annexed lands outside the city boundary. And so what I really want to highlight is that the annexing is really at the crux of us not meeting some of these goals. And so it's the annexing that is really going to impact how successful this general plan update is, specifically for the land use alternative update. The last figure here is fiscally. The city of Santa Maria it's very important that we meet our fiscal responsibility. As you can see, the more you annex, there is a higher revenue for that plan. But if you compare the infill alternative to the hybrid alternative, it actually does make higher revenue. So compared to the plan that they are hoping to vote in, the infill would actually create higher revenues potentially for the city. And so hopefully these kind of 5 key reasons, and here you can really see the trade-offs between annexing and the trade-offs between developing within the city. We would lose out on a more walkable city, on lower emissions, on less impact of oil and gas hazards. We would, not be able to meet these goals. And so what's coming up next is really a policy discussion. So the city council meeting will be meeting next Tuesday on November 7th at 5:30 at City Hall in Santa Maria. And so we're really trying to advocate for the city council to recommend and approve the infill alternative. Right now, they're looking at the modified hybrid approach, which includes these additional annexed lands. And so for folks who want to learn more about it, please read the op-ed in Newshawk and the Santa Maria Times, or the article in the Santa Maria Sun. But hopefully, that is a 15-minute spiel on the general plan. One of the reasons why we meet monthly is because this is so complex and it has many different parts. And so I apologize if I rambled or if I kind of shared a little bit too much information dumping there, but do people have questions? I would be happy to answer any questions people have.
Before you answer the questions, I just want to note that I put in the chat a link that I'm now creating on our website so that these materials you referenced will be there, including the wonderful post from Sarah. She always has links for us, and she monitors the agenda. So if you want to call up the city council agenda, it'll be on this link. I'm also putting in the letter and the appendix to the letter that the many organizations signed on to that Alan referenced. And I think there's some other things I probably need to add to that. So don't go there yet, but I'll be publishing that page shortly. And so those references will be there. So questions for Alhan? Comments? I guess you covered it all. No comments on it. It's it's a big deal. Joyce was involved for many years to keep land outside of Lompoc from being annexed there. It was the Bailey Avenue parcel. And I don't know if you'd want to chime in, Joyce, but there was a lot of prime ag land that could have been annexed, and if it weren't for Joyce's efforts and SBCAN's efforts, that land might have been annexed, and it wasn't, because LAFCO did not approve it. Do you want to say anything about that, Joyce?
Well, no, I would just add that SBCAN, as well as the Environmental Defense Center, really made a difference. And what Bailey Avenue showed us is that we can actually fight it and we can win. The downside is we have to keep fighting it to keep getting the wins. But so far we've been very successful, and it would not have happened without people stepping up, speaking out, going to the meeting, contacting their elected officials. That's the key. And so I think with SBCAN's work and with the community's work, we can be as successful in Santa Maria. Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Joyce, for that. And yeah, and Alhan has said the hybrid plan. It was amazing. We thought it was amazing that they wanted to annex 800, or they put in a proposal to annex 800 acres, and then the Planning Commission added another 200 acres. Well, that's not enough. Let's annex 1,000 acres instead. So our position is that we should do the infill, and it really does make a lot of sense from a planning point of view, and from all the different aspects that Alhan brought up. And Alhan has been such a leader on this. He came up with the idea for these monthly meetings and got SBCAN involved and the other organizations. So really appreciate that, Alhan.
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie. And I think the only thing that I would want to highlight is the things that I covered today. These points are the city's own analysis. And so really this is only half of the conversation. And so this is kind of where we want to ask other organizations to figure out what those gaps are, what your own recommendations would be. This basically shows that there is a plan that meets the needs, and that they know better. But it's still important for different organizations to speak up on specifically what does land use alternative, how does it impact your organization or your work, or again, the specific community needs. Housing is the #1 issue that everyone is talking about, including community members. And when we're talking about annexing land, we're really talking about developing new communities. And these communities, when we're hearing the Planning Commission or certain city council members talk about them, it's really specific. They're not talking about 99% affordable housing or 100% affordable housing. They're talking about development units that will be 5% affordable, 2% affordable units. Most of these units that would be developed would be in the moderate or above moderate. And so we really have to talk about, if we're going to annex in the outside of city bounds, what do those neighborhoods look like? Are they going to increase housing capacity for low income families? Are these schools that will be needed to be built? Will they also impact low income families because they also need schools? One of the biggest issues that we heard is a need for additional school sites, but also at different community meetings, it was really interesting hearing about preserving housing, because one of the common concerns that we heard was the lack of maintenance that is being done. And so these housing units, these apartments that people are currently renting, they're not being maintained. And so what are we losing in the long run if the city isn't doing enough to actually maintain it and keep those affordable units that people currently live livable. And so again, the points that I highlighted today are really the city's own viewpoints. And so we know that that's a very limited perspective. And so I really want to invite others to come and to share their own ideas and, you know, their own vision of how the city should grow for the next, you know, until 2050. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Any more discussion on this? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Dick if he's still there. He's got a nice picture of him there.
I'm here and maybe self-servingly want to remind people about, guess what? The SBCAN brunch on November 12th. You want to say more about it, Jeannie? So
Yeah, I've probably hit everybody up here a dozen times with our emails. But we're really looking forward to this on Sunday, November 12th. We're honoring Dick for his lifelong activism, and Dick didn't want to have the spotlight only on himself, so he has invited community leaders that he has worked with, and we're so excited to have all of them in Santa Barbara. It will be at El Paseo Restaurant, and we've got more sponsors than we've ever had. It's either 39 or 40 at this point. So we really appreciate all of them. And looking forward to having this event.
and hopefully tickets are going fast, so get your tickets. And I think you can negotiate with Jeannie if you can't afford the rather high price of the ticket. But remember, it's a fundraiser for SBCAN that enables Jeannie and Nancy to do the work that is helping us do what we
And
do. Yeah.
right, and we do have some tickets that have been donated. So there are tickets available for no cost, or if you want to pay a sliding scale. And we could use a couple more volunteers. So of course we give our volunteers free tickets. So if anybody wants to step up to volunteer, or you know somebody who wants to, please let them know. We'd appreciate their help.
And spread the word. So thanks everybody for being here, and read that report, get hold of it, download it, and let's use it. I think I keep thinking it's an important thing because the power elite sits on the board of the foundation, the local, business and sort of upper class folks. And if they're ready to accept this report and what it's saying, that's conceivably a breakthrough. I'm always searching for hope, and we need a lot of it these days, don't we? Anyway, thanks, folks, and see you all soon. We'll sign
Okay,
off.
Bye, guys.
I'd like to ask Nancy to stay on. We'll have a little staff meeting. Everybody goes.
Okay.
And Dick, if you wanted to stay on to talk about event, you could too. Whatever.
You need me?
I don't know. I think we probably got all the updates, but just if there was anything.
No, I need to go actually. So
Okay.
thanks.
All right. Thanks, Dick. Thanks. Oh, let me end the recording.